Well, thank you for joining us for this meeting of the Ocean Protection Council. Many of us are located for the meeting here at the California Natural Resources Agency headquarters in Sacramento. And then we have many joining from throughout the state and possibly even outside of California through our hybrid meeting format. I'm pleased to be sitting next to the Lieutenant Governor, who, as you heard in the last meeting, has returned to help lead the Ocean Protection Council. And I'm glad today to introduce, in a very exciting way, new members that we have who will be serving with us on the council. But before we do that, I would turn it over to our colleague Holly to call the roll.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. First off, Secretary Crowfoot.
Here.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis.
Present.
Katie Landau.
Present.
Catherine Moore.
Present.
Jim Evans.
Present.
Megan Rocha.
Present.
Alexis Jackson.
Present.
And Jeneckerly.
Oh. Here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I would just make note that we have Senator Allen joining us virtually, we believe, for the first 45 minutes, and then he'll be replaced by his staff member, Catherine Moore. So Senator Allen, if you're on and you want to pipe up at any point, including as we do member introductions, please. Oh, I actually see Senator Allen walking into the building right now. So he will be joining us shortly. So first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce two new public members who are sitting in our public member seats that the governor appointed just in recent weeks. We're thrilled to welcome Alexis Jackson and Megan Rocha to the council. They each bring really important perspectives and professional experience that will continue to improve the work of our council. So just before the meeting, we swore them in. So you all are officially council members. And then in a moment, I'll introduce Jim Evans. But before we move on, I just ask Alexis and then Megan, if you could just to introduce yourself and a little bit about your background and what you bring to the council. Alexis.
I'll go first. Alexis Jackson. I'm the Ocean Policy and Plastics Lead at the Nature Conservancy, the California chapter. I have a background in population genetics and have since engaged in fisheries management at the federal level and engaging in environmental advocacy and international ocean policy at kind of international scale fisheries negotiations and now conversations in the state. So I just briefly wanted to thank Governor Newsom for the appointment and to thank my friends and colleagues and mentors for believing that I could create positive environmental change. I'm a sixth generation Californian, so I do not take ocean protection lightly. And California is my home. And I am promising, in my role at OPC to be inquisitive, to be science-driven, and to challenge us to be ambitious in the goals and actions that we take to protect our coastal and ocean resources and to ensure sustainable resource use, and to also make sure that we're creating a more welcoming environment for people across the state, to make sure that we're inclusive and thoughtful and engaging diverse communities. So thank you for the opportunity.
Huge thanks, and we're thrilled to have you. We talk a lot about science-based decision-making, so it's really appropriate and important that we have a scientist as part of our council. So thank you for joining us. Megan.
Yes, thank you. So my name's Megan Rocha. I'm the executive director for Resiliency Rancheria, which is a tribe of Yurok people in far northern California. I also sit on the leadership council for the Tribal Marine Stewards Network, which I'm very proud of being a founder of. I was born and raised in Humboldt County in a very rural area, and the ocean was a very big part of my upbringing. Living off the land is a big part of how I was raised and how I raise now my 5 children. And I've lived in Humboldt County my whole life, except for 2 years when I went away to live in Kansas to go to grad school, which was obviously very different. So I did graduate from Humboldt State undergrad and then University of Kansas for my master's. I've worked with North Coast tribes for nearly 20 years in a variety of capacities. And 15 of those have been specific in marine stewardship, really focused on trying to build capacity and make sure that tribes have a stronger presence in stewarding their ancestral lands and waters. So like Alexis said, I'm really honored and appreciate the appointment by the governor and for all the support from OPC and getting to work with many folks at OPC over the years and for all the support that I have back home. And I appreciate just the bold actions that OPC takes, big, bold steps, and making sure that things are based on science and inclusivity of the communities that are most impacted. So thank you so much.
Megan, thank you so much for helping shape a lot of the policies we've been driving. And it's been so energizing to see the Tribal Marine Stewards Network take off under your leadership. So more to come on that. We are also pleased in welcoming Assemblymember Dawn Addis, who takes over for Assemblymember Mark Stone as he terms out. And Assemblymember Addis represents a new district that includes, I believe, 200 miles of California coast. And so we will personally welcome Assemblymember Addis in a subsequent meeting, but we have here her Chief of Staff, Jim Evans, who I know from serving in the administration of Jerry Brown. So if you would, Jim, just share a little bit about Assemblymember Addis and what your team hopes to accomplish here at the Ocean Protection Council.
I'll be very brief as a designee, but thank you very much, Wade. She regrets being here. Obviously, the Assembly member regrets not being here because session starts right now and has Natural Resources Committee right after that. But she wants to thank the speaker, obviously, for appointing her to this position. She represents 200 miles of coastline in the Central Coast, roughly from the Santa Barbara SLO County line all the way up to Capitola Aptos in Santa Cruz County. So obviously, ocean protection is incredibly important to her. She's thrilled to be working with the amazing public servants of the OPC, a Natural Resources Agency, on ocean protection, which is so important to our district. And anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. And I'll welcome Senator Allen and let the record reflect that you're joining the meeting. I know that you have very, very busy agenda over in the legislature. So thanks for being here. Yeah, we understand you're toggling back and forth. So, and you have staff to serve in your capacity when you have to go back. Well, listen, in a moment, I'll invite the Lieutenant Governor and others to share any updates or thoughts they have, but I will share one breaking update as of last week, and that is continued leadership and support from the federal administration of President Biden and Vice President Harris. The announcement of across the country over $500 million of funding through NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, including close to $83 million that is being granted to organizations across California, focused on coastal resilience, blue ocean jobs, carbon storage, and habitat restoration. We're excited that a number of different entities receive funding, including California Native American tribes and coastal communities. And we view this as really supporting the work that we do at the OPC. Notable that some of our key partners receive funding, including Sea Grant and the California National Marine Sanctuaries. And I note that one of those grants to Sea Grant will support elevating equity in the implementation of our state's ocean litter strategy. So more wind in our sails in terms of all the work we're doing to protect our coasts and oceans, thanks to the president and the vice president. So good news there. Would turn to any council members if they want to share any thoughts or announcements at this time. Okay. Oh yeah. Yes, Lieutenant Governor.
I wasn't sure. It sounded like you had a particular time.
No,
but I just first of all wanted to say it's great to be back as a member of this esteemed body. I am here for the new members in particular as the president or the chair of the State Lands Commission. And I want to simply welcome all of you. And I'm very much looking forward to the contributions that you'll make. And also just by way of introduction, the chair of the State Lands Commission serves in an alternating role on this body. So there are only 3 members of state lands. The chair alternates every year between the lieutenant governor and the controller. And then depending on the year and when you're serving as president, you also serve on this body. So you'll see I'll be here 1 year, and then next year it will be Controller Malia Cohen, and then back again. The State Lands Commission is responsible for overseeing about 5 million acres of California land. It is primarily along the waterways and the coastline, and primarily submerged waters. So up to 3 miles off the coast, and then again along our waterways. And I know that simply based on the credentials that you bring, that we are all tasked by the people of this great state to respond to the challenges brought on by a warming climate. The many years now of extreme weather are taking a toll. And this body is at the forefront of combating climate change and building resiliency into our system. So it's a privilege to be back, and it's wonderful to serve with the new members. Thank you.
Thank you, and for all the leadership and energy you bring. Very much appreciated. So let's move to our executive director's update and hear from Jeneckerly.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. I also would just like to welcome Assemblymember Addis and her Chief of Staff, Jim Evans, and our new council members, Jackson and Rocha, to the council. We are very excited for your leadership, your perspective, and the expertise that each of you bring. And we look forward to your input and guidance directing our work. For the benefit of our new council members, I'm going to give a brief overview of our strategic plan, which is directing our efforts from 2020 to 2025. And I have just a few slides if they can come up. Our strategic plan is focused on 4 goals, and I'm going to walk through very quickly each goal, highlight some objectives under each of those goals, and provide a few examples of recent accomplishments over the last several years. So before I start, I do want to point out that the plan was purposely entitled Strategic Plan to Protect California's Coast and Ocean, as it not only reflects OPC's priorities, but also those across our relevant state agencies. We do not and cannot do this work alone, and each objective identifies the partner agencies that are helping us achieve these specific top targets. So our first strategic goal you'll see here on the slides is focused on addressing climate change. This goal includes objectives around sea level rise, ocean acidification and hypoxia, and wetland restoration. Recent accomplishments under this goal over the last several years include the development of sea level rise principles and a state agency sea level rise action plan, which serves to align state agency action to build coastal resilience, investments to establish a baseline inventory of coastal habitats, and we will then use that baseline to understand sea level rise vulnerability of those habitats. Creation of a sea level rise task force to update our sea level rise projections and our associated state guidance, and investments in coordinated ocean acidification and hypoxia monitoring, building on existing programs, and better connecting biological and chemical monitoring. Next slide, please. The second goal is really focused on advancing equity across all of our work. This includes objectives focused on improving partnership and engagement with California Native American tribes and communities that are burdened by environmental and social injustice. And it also focuses on increasing coastal access. Recent accomplishments under this goal include adoption of OPC's first ever equity plan and tribal engagement strategy, funding for environmental justice small grants program, and a separate tribal small grants program, additional $3.6 million investment in the Tribal Marine Stewards Network to support tribally led research, restoration, and stewardship of our coast and ocean, and a land return to the Wiyot tribe in Humboldt County for ecocultural restoration, water quality protection, and conservation. Next slide, please. Our third goal is all around enhancing biodiversity. This includes objectives focused on protecting and restoring marine ecosystems, including kelp forests, rocky intertidal, beaches, and eelgrass, management of our globally significant marine protected area network, protecting water quality, which includes addressing plastics and microplastics, and ensuring that we have sustainable fisheries. Recent accomplishments under this goal include significant investments in our MPA management program, including long-term monitoring, outreach and education, and research projects that will help increase our understanding of the role that our MPAs are playing in providing resilience to climate change. We also played a key role in helping the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Fish and Game Commission with our first ever decadal management review of California's MPA network, which was released in January. We've made investments in over $3.5 million in kelp restoration and research projects, with additional investments to enhance kelp canopy monitoring using remote sensing techniques. $1 million contribution to support the drift gillnet transition program in partnership with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which will result in the removal of this harmful gear from the ocean. Adoption of the first in the nation microplastic strategy that recommends early actions and research priorities to reduce microplastic pollution in the marine environment. And we continue to work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, fishermen, scientists, and NGO partners to improve data and identify innovative strategies to reduce the risk of whale entanglement in fishing gear, with the goal of protecting marine life and supporting thriving fisheries. Next slide, please. And finally, goal 4, which is centered all around the sustainable blue economy. And this objective is focused on offshore wind, sustainable aquaculture, and offshore oil platform decommissioning. Some recent accomplishments under this goal include investments in projects that will help us understand the potential impacts of offshore wind development on marine life, habitats, communities, fisheries, and tribes, and the development of guiding principles for aquaculture development, and the establishment of a statewide aquaculture leadership team that's working to develop an action plan that will create comprehensive, consistent, and science-based framework and policy for marine aquaculture in California, with a focus on marine algae and shellfish. While the strategic plan does serve as our roadmap, we are responsive to emerging issues that were not included in the plan. The state's initiative to protect 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030 is a perfect example of that. So while that was not included in our strategic plan, 30 by 30 has become a key priority for staff, with OPC serving as the lead for implementing this conservation initiative in coastal waters, in close partnership with Dr. Jennifer Norris, the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat at the Resources Agency, and her team. Last December, we were a part of a delegation at COP15 in Montreal with Secretary Crowfoot, Senator Allen, other members of the legislature, and many NGO partners. We were rolling California strong, and we were showcasing our global leadership around the 30 by 30 effort and our MPA network. I also want to highlight our 2022 State of the Coast and Ocean Report, which includes a suite of preliminary ocean health indicators and a more comprehensive summary of our achievements in meeting our strategic plan goals last year. If you want to do a deeper dive, you can find this report linked in item 4 of our January 24th, 2023 meeting agenda. And finally, just a few quick personnel updates. I mentioned this at the last meeting, but Ben Dorfman and Katie Seary have both started their 2023 Sea Grant Fellowships with us. Ben's working in our climate program, and Katie in our biodiversity team. So I thought they were going to be here. I don't see them here. So we'll just say hello to them virtually. I'm also happy to share that Pike Spector will be joining us on May 1st as an environmental scientist in our biodiversity program. Pike comes to us from the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, where he was working as a marine scientist. Before that, he was a Sea Grant Fellow with the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And he's got a background in kelp forest ecology and marine science, as well as experience working with fishermen and tribes. After receiving close to 80 applications, we have selected 5 students to participate in our 2023 summer internship program. Veronica Whaley, Alyssa Ng, Nathan Lee, Bella Carrion, and Azura Haley will join us in June. And Audrey Jung will be the 6th intern in this cohort, and she will be coming to us through a merit-based undergraduate award at Stanford. We're really excited and looking forward to having these impressive students work with us this summer, and we plan to have them present their work to the council at our August meeting. Next, I am delighted to share that we just promoted Mike Eckerle to Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor. Mike will continue to lead our biodiversity work, serve as our tribal liaison, and run point on all of our international efforts. So congratulations, Mike. And finally, I am hopeful that we will be able to post the job announcement for our deputy director within the next week or two. Very hopeful. I'm looking for someone who can lead OPC's administrative functions, so our operational and program budgets, staff management, workforce planning, and work closely with me and the council to advance our short and long-term strategic priorities. So that concludes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much. And council members know that we are focused on getting that deputy director hired in part because Jenn is really serving in 2 roles right now. If you recall, she has served as the deputy director for OPC, and then the governor recently promoted her and appointed her to be the deputy secretary of our agency for Coasts and Oceans. And part of that job is being director of OPC. So building the administrative function through a deputy director is really quite important. And congratulations, Mike and others for promotions and for hiring. And as always, we're really excited to welcome that cohort of paid interns. I think this will be the 3rd year that we have interns. And I know it's a highlight for me to experience the interns presenting at the tail end of their internship this summer. Thank you. So I noticed Liz is not here in person, but is joining probably virtually. All right, so Liz serves as, Dr. Liz Whiteman serves as our Executive Director of Ocean Science Trust. And so Liz, if you are out there in the virtual space, please unmute yourself, and there you are. You can give your presentation or update.
Thank you, Chair Crowfoot, council members. I appreciate the option to join remotely from London. And I'm also horrified to be on the big screen. So I look forward to being back in person at the next meeting. 3 quick updates for you today. For the new council members, I just wanted to acknowledge how much I value the unique OPC and OST partnership, and say that for these meetings, I really aim to share some highlight updates from the work of Ocean Science Trust in supporting progress towards the OPC strategic plan and California's priorities, and from our position in convening and chairing the OPC Science Advisory Team. So on that, on Strategic Plan Goal 1 and specifically Objective 1.1 to build resilience to sea level rise, coastal storms, erosion, and flooding. As mentioned, we are convening a sea level rise task force in partnership with OPC, and the task force continues its work. Thank you to the amazing time and input and investment from all the task force members. You may recall that at your last meeting, I shared that the task force was focused on developing scenarios of sea level rise. Those draft scenarios have been developed and are now being peer reviewed by experts to ensure their technical rigor. So we're moving to the next stages of this work. First, to examine and articulate the physical impacts resulting from sea level rise projections. So we're asking, given a specific scenario, what are the impacts on beaches, coastal ecosystems and habitat, groundwater, for example? And how do we present that information and tools so that it is useful for decision makers? On the latter point, the 3rd major component of this updated guidance is, well, it's the guidance piece. Given the broad range of decisions, this is intended to inform from local city planners to regional managers to state agencies. Across many sectors, we're scheduling a series of engagement workshops now to seek input at these different scales and across these sectors so that we can provide useful guidance about how to use the scenarios and understand sea level rise impacts. Switching topics, and second update to Strategic Plan Goal 3. Building on the work that Jenn mentioned, completed by OPC staff and summer interns last year to begin to identify indicators of coastal and ocean health. We've convened subcommittees of your science advisory team to provide input and recommendations for how to take still early, but next steps and make progress towards the goal of an ocean report card in 2025. So science advisory team members are contributing their technical expertise and knowledge of existing data collection programs to inform the development of further indicators for this end of year 2023 reporting. Third, and finally, earlier this month, we were privileged to convene a foundational workshop discussion in support of advancing OPC's actions in the 30 by 30 Pathways Roadmap. Specifically, we convened groups that have undertaken efforts to create inventories or assessments of spatial management measures in California state waters, as an early step in assessing the potential for what are termed OECMs, other effective conservation measures that may, with further dialogue and scientific guidance, contribute towards achieving the 30 by 30 goal in coastal waters. Extending thanks to MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, for hosting that workshop, and to the many state, federal, and non-governmental resource managers and data experts who shared their expertise and resources with us to launch that discussion. And I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, for all the work that the Ocean Science Trust does. We want to move now to agenda item 4, and agenda items 4 through 9, we invite public comment on. These are proposed actions. And so I want to take a moment to explain how public comment works if you're tuning in or here for the first time. After each of these items are presented by OPC staff, we'll ask for public comment. If you want to make a comment and you're attending here in person, please line up next to the podium or near the podium. We'll take in-person public comments first. Once all in-person folks have spoken, we'll take public comment from those joining us virtually. If you're joining us through Zoom, please raise your virtual hand, which is that button on the bottom of the screen, and we will unmute you, announce your name, and you'll be able to provide your comment to the council. We also allow for comment via telephone. So if you've called into the meeting via telephone, you'll need to press #2 to raise your hand. And depending on how you've accessed the meeting, you may also need to unmute yourself. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes each, so we can hear from everybody and get through all of the items of our meeting. And there'll be a timer on the screen that you can look at to track your allotted time. Anyone interested in providing comment, we need you to raise your hand or by the end of the agenda presentation from the OPC staff, or press that #2 if you're on phone. Hands raised after that time generally are not placed in the queue for comment. I'll also say that at the end of our meeting, we have an item that allows for public comment on all topics that weren't specifically covered in each item. So if you want to address the OPC and it's an item not specifically related to one of these presentations or proposed actions, then we invite you to make that comment an agenda item number 10, which will be at the end of the meeting. So with that said, we will now move to action item number 4, which is the consideration and potential approval to disperse funding to create a technical assistance program to support sea level rise adaptation planning. And this action item advances that strategic plan goal number 1, which is all about protecting our coasts in the face of climate change. And to present on this proposed action, we have Megan Williams, one of our program managers.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. As he said, my name is Megan Williams, and I'm the Coastal Adaptation Program Manager at OPC, and I'm here to talk to you today about establishing a technical assistance program to support sea level rise adaptation planning. Next slide, please. So for some background, in 2021, Governor Newsom signed Senate Bill 1 into law. SB 1 directs the state to provide funding to local and regional governments to develop sea level rise adaptation plans and implementation projects. Currently, there are many gaps in adaptation planning along the coast. As part of an OPC-funded project that created an inventory and analysis of California's progress on coastal adaptation planning, It was determined that only 9 out of the 76 coastal jurisdictions have updated local coastal programs that include sea level rise. And while 22 jurisdictions have sea level rise adaptation plans, the plans are not consistent in their standards or criteria. In 2022, OPC received $37.5 million to support the implementation of SB1. While OPC's SB1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Grant Program, or SB1 Grant Program for short, is still in the process of being developed, the overall goal of the program is to provide funding for coastal communities to develop sea level rise adaptation plans to build resilience to sea level rise along the entire coast of California and San Francisco Bay. OPC is working closely with the state agency Sea Level Rise Collaborative as we develop the SB1 grant program, particularly when it comes to the sea level rise planning criteria. And we are working closely with the Coastal Commission to ensure our program is complementary to and supports their LCP efforts. Next slide, please. OPC recognizes that all Californians have the right to equitable access to the resources available through OPC. However, environmental justice and tribal communities often face challenges when competing with well-resourced entities for funding. Therefore, OPC acknowledges the need for technical assistance to support direct application services and capacity building support for technical assistance recipients. Next slide, please. Recognizing this need, we aim to create an SB1 technical assistance program to support direct application services for local, regional, and tribal governments wishing to apply to the SB1 grant program who meet specified criteria to receive technical assistance. A technical assistance provider, or TA provider for short, will be selected through a competitive grant solicitation. Following selection, OPC staff will work closely with the TA provider to design the TA program to fit the SB1 grant program's goals and funding source requirements. The TA provider will then lead the development of the TA work plan, which will include determining the criteria for identifying TA recipients, the type of technical assistance that will be provided, and scope of work, all in close coordination with OPC staff. In addition to providing targeted technical assistance to the SB1 grant program applicants, we hope that this first ever OPC TA program lays the groundwork for future OPC technical assistance opportunities. Next slide, please. The selection of a TA provider and the development of the TA program is anticipated to occur this summer. A TA provider will be selected based on their capacity and expertise needed to administer the program, experience working in and with EJ communities and California Native American tribes, expertise in California coastal climate and environmental topics, including but not limited to sea level rise planning, and experience developing applications for competitive grants, implementing those grants through strong project management, and coordinating with state and federal grantors. The TA program and SB1 grant program are planned for a paired launch in fall 2023. Following the launch, qualifying SB1 grant applicants can receive targeted assistance with elements of the grant application process, such as project scoping, data collection, and evaluation methodologies, and so on. Next slide, please. So with that, the recommendation is for $1 million to establish an SB1 technical assistance program that will provide targeted technical assistance for qualifying applicants of the SB1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Grant Program. This action would meet objectives 1.1 and 2.2 of our strategic plan, and we hope will be just the beginning of an OPC technical assistance opportunities. And with that, next slide. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan. Before we take public comment, I want to just share thoughts on this. I think this is a really big deal for two reasons. One is across the Newsom administration, and I would argue with our legislature, we recognize that the way that we've historically provided grant funding has had some really unequal results, which meaning sometimes the communities that most need our funding are least well positioned to apply for that funding. And so paradoxically, the entities that receive the funding tend to be the most already well-resourced entities. And that's really where technical assistance and capacity building come in. So I think that's really important. And then Megan, you identified that of 76 coastal jurisdictions, 67 of them, all but 9, have not yet integrated sea level rise into their coastal plans. So if we're expecting or asking communities to be ready for sea level rise and all of its impacts, that's a really important metric that demonstrates that we have a long way to go. And a lot of those communities are those that really lack capacity necessarily to do that, policy development. So I'm really excited about this proposed program and think it's really important. Let's move to public comment. And Holly, I would ask you if we have anyone in the queue for public comment here today.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Looks like we only have one virtual speaker, and that's going to be Walter Lamb. Walter, you have the floor.
Thank you. Walter Lamb, I'm speaking on my own behalf today. And I want to start by saying that in many people I know, 100% support this idea of making sure that these resources, can go to the best organizations, not necessarily the ones that already have, the most well-funded grant writers. So support the intent 100%. I have a couple of concerns. The first of which is that at least 2 different state agencies under the natural resources umbrella have taken the position that information in the staff report and presentation really have no bearing, that not binding. In other words, not something that you could base a decision on. That's a concern, because much of what I support about this is in the presentation we just heard and in the staff report. So that's problematic. The other thing is we've seen similar grants like this, again, with assurances in the staff report and in the staff presentation that evaporated once the grant was made. And there's a concern here that, the big organizations that Secretary was just talking about, they know that they need to be saying the right things about equity, but they've got big budgets and they're not looking really to lose revenue from these grants. And so there has to be some sort of mechanism, I think, for measuring how this $1 million actually changes the equation, right? So some sort of measurement capability. And then finally, and I'll say this, I hate to say it, I voted for Governor Newsom all 3 times he was on the ballot, but we're seeing some substantial divergence between what's being stated politically, from a branding perspective on the national stage, to what we're seeing actually happen in these projects, especially with regard to sea level rise. And that's a concern, because PowerPoints are not going to solve the problem. The projects need to do what we're all saying needs to be done. And we're concerned that that's not happening. And so everybody who cares about sea level rise needs to be sure that we're focusing on end results.
Thank you, Walter. Appreciate that. Appreciate your comments. Holly, is there anyone else in the public comment queue?
That is it for public comment. Thank you.
Okay. We will turn to questions or comments from any of our council members. All right, then I would, sorry. Councilmember Jackson.
New to this. No, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of this precedent that we're setting, and to make sure that we continue to prioritize these type of support systems and mechanisms for communities. And then also just in thinking about the magnitude of what this kind of a technical assistance program can do, is like unpacking EJ communities and reminding people, like we were talking about Black and Brown communities and low-income communities as well. And so this is really going to be impactful and a step in the right direction. I just want to make sure that as we talk about EJ communities in general, sometimes we think about what that really means. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, sometimes the stereotype of California coastal communities is that they're all affluent, and we know that's not the case. And in fact, there was a report last year entitled Toxic Tides that identified certain toxic sites in disadvantaged communities, in EJ communities on the coast that are impacted by sea level rise. So really important reminder of that. Thank you. Yeah, Jim.
Just as a point of clarification, you mentioned as a euphemism, communities a couple of times. Are you referring to cities essentially? Are the ones that haven't had a plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Our target grant applicants will be local or regional governments or tribal governments for the SB1 grant program. So it would be those communities or those government that would be applying for the actual technical assistance as well.
So tribal governments, COGs, and cities, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And can you remind us of just the importance of a local coastal plan and what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very much in the Coastal Commission side of things, but this is really the opportunity for local governments to be able to implement plans and development for their jurisdictions or for their area. And so having updates to sea level rise for those, actually taking that into consideration, that climate change and those changes to it is really important to be able to, be making sure that their coast is actually resilient and the projects are going to be around for many years to come.
Thanks, Megan. So we would entertain a motion to approve this item, and specifically the disbursement of funds to create technical assistance program to support sea level rise adaptation planning.
So moved.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Katie. Holly, can you call the roll?
Fourth, Secretary Crowfoot,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis,
Aye.
Katie Landau,
Yes.
Megan Rocha,
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Yes.
The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Thanks so much, Megan, for your presentation. Now we'll move on to action item number 5, which is consideration and approval to disperse funding, this time to expand the California Coastal Adaptation Planning Inventory. And this also advances that strategic plan goal 1, which is all about how to protect the coast and ecosystems in the face of climate change. We will hear a presentation on this item from Ella McDougall, one of our other program managers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and council members. My name is Ella McDougall, and I'm OPC's Climate Change Program Manager. I'm here today to request approval for funding to UC Santa Barbara's Ocean and Coastal Policy Center to expand the California Coastal Adaptation Planning Inventory. Slide, please. This inventory, a snapshot of which you will see on the left of the slide, serves as an online repository for information, status, and documents related to sea level rise planning across California. It covers 76 outer coastal jurisdictions, which include 15 counties and 61 cities. Within the inventory, sea level rise planning is broken down into several phases. We have vulnerability assessments, local coastal programs that are updated with specific considerations for sea level rise, adaptation plans and strategy documents, and on-the-ground physical projects and studies. The inventory was originally approved for funding by the Ocean Protection Council in February of 2021 as a part of a Prop 68 competitive solicitation. It is publicly available on the OPC website, UCSB's Ocean and Coastal Policy Center's website, and recently on the Ocean and Coastal Platform website, which is an international network of ocean and coastal climate organizations interfacing science and policy across the globe. So we reached international status. Slide, please. As OPC progresses toward our goal of preparing the entire coast of California for sea level rise, this inventory has shared critical insights and planning gaps that still exist. And indeed, gaps there are. Out of 76 coastal jurisdictions, 47 have completed their vulnerability assessments, 22 have completed sea level rise adaptation plans, 63 have certified LCPs, but as Megan mentioned previously, only 9 have updated their LCPs to include specific considerations for sea level rise. The inventory also includes 5 implemented coastal adaptation studies and projects that are really worthy of mention. The Marin County Stinson Beach Nature-Based Adaptation Feasibility Study, the City of Carpinteria's Dune and Shoreline Management Plan, City of Ventura's Surfers Point Managed Shoreline Retreat Project, and a beach dune restoration project for the City of Manhattan Beach. Slide, please. As I mentioned, the proposed funding would expand the inventory to include additional information for 4 geographic regions: the San Francisco Bay Area, tribal lands, federal lands, and California state parks. This will expand the reach of this research project to be more inclusive of the entire California coastline. The grantee is also currently assessing status and trends of adaptation planning in California. The assessment will include a discussion on effective planning scales, such as local, regional, project, or sector-based planning, best practices for community involvement, criteria for adaptation planning, and approaches to adaptation planning pathways. With recommendations for improving the state's sea level rise planning and LCP policy update process, this report will provide critical information and guidance as SB1 shapes up as OPC shapes up its SB1 sea level rise planning grant program later this year. This report is expected to be released in June of this year for the outer coast and for the 4 additional regions next June of 2024. Slide, please. In summary, this project not only creates a valuable resource to better assess gaps in adaptation planning along the outer coast of California, it also will analyze best practices for completed plans so that we may push for consistent, equitable, and efficient planning, as well as investments as we go forward. For these reasons, staff recommends approval to disperse up to $310,000 to UCSB for the expansion of the California Coastal Adaptation Planning Inventory, which amends a current project grant. This project pushes forward OPC's Strategic Plan 1.1, build resiliency to sea level rise, coastal storms, erosion, and flooding. Slide, please. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'm here to take any questions. And I believe the PI of this project, Dr. Charles Lester, is also on the line for any more detailed questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ella. Let's move to public comment. Holly, are there any public commenters in the queue?
There are none in the queue for this item.
All right, we'll open it up to council members. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much. I just want to commend, Mr. Chair, the staff in recognizing that it's really important to find efficiencies wherever we can find them and implement them and use the incredible body of work that's already been done, and that jurisdictions that, as you noted before, have the resources to conduct this work to be able to make that available to other jurisdictions. You know, the $1 million in grants that's been allocated is a significant tool, but it won't go far enough if every jurisdiction that needs technical support has to invent the wheel for themselves. So I am just always very, very thrilled when I see government finding efficiencies like this. And so thank you for doing this. And I have no doubt that as those jurisdictions other than the 9 that have already done and all the other work that has been done, whether it's just through those particular plans or the other resources that are out there, this will help consolidate what jurisdictions and stakeholders along our coast are doing, because this is a real and present reality. We've seen it now, certainly in the last few months, the battering of the shore that the atmospheric rivers brought in, being able to learn from that experience and for the OPC to be able to be like a clearinghouse of information is just terrific. So I'm going to support this item and again, just want to commend staff for recognizing the need and figuring out how to do it.
Thanks so much, Lieutenant Governor. And I should have mentioned this at the top, but if any council members want to speak, you could just press that button on your microphone and then I'll be able to look down the row and see that color green indicates that you want to speak. Question for Ella or Mr. Lester, based on the Lieutenant Governor's comments. I think I'm with her, really applaud the ability to get our arms around all that's happening across coastal communities and provide an inventory for each other to learn from. What are have you had experiences around the inventory being used between jurisdictions to help build planning efforts, and or, for you or Mr. Lester, what are the plans to make sure that that inventory is usable by those who could benefit from it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We did do a presentation and a share out to the Sea Level Rise Collaborative last year, I believe, to ensure that they were aware of the inventory and how it can be utilized. I do know that it has been used, I believe by the Coastal Commission to take a look at planning status for different jurisdictions, and I am sure by other agencies and planners. So it's definitely being utilized. As I mentioned, it's on our website and it's also on UCSB's website, and it does have that other platform where it's being housed. So it's definitely a great example of how we can gather the planning status into one central location for our state. I'll see if Dr. Lester has anything to share or to add.
Mr. Lester, you have permissions to speak now. Just unmute yourself.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot and council members and Ella and staff. On your question about whether it's been used, I do have some anecdotal information, I guess, that some people have been looking to it to see examples of what's going on elsewhere. That I wouldn't say we've systematically answered that question yet. I also have some anecdotal evidence that your sister agency OPR has found it useful in finding out what's going on in the adaptation space along the coastal area, outer coast.
That's really helpful.
I was just going to make that point that we've been working really closely with OPR and their adaptation clearinghouse to make sure that this information is integrated into that platform.
That's great. So it sounds like really strong progress is being made to ensure that it can be utilized. And I would just encourage you to continue to help promote it and socialize it, whether it's with the League of California Cities or the California State Association of Counties, or even the entity formerly known as the Local Government Council, which is I don't have that at the tip of my tongue, but point being, a lot of associations of local governments in which to share this as a tool. Good. Megan.
Yeah, I just have a question. In terms of how you're defining tribal lands, I would just encourage focusing on reservation and fee-owned lands owned by federally recognized tribes in particular. So just be aware of sort of how you're defining that, because really it's all tribal lands, right? Really, but yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for that comment. We've actually had initial discussions on how to determine tribal lands, and I think that is a really, really important point to make, that all of our land is ancestral tribal land. So thank you.
Excellent. So I would entertain a motion to consider, or I should say approve, this disbursement of funds to expand the California Coastal Adaptation Planning Inventory.
So moved.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. We need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Alexis. Holly, please call roll.
Secretary Crowfoot,
Aye.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis,
Aye.
Katie Landau,
Aye.
Megan Rocha,
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Aye.
The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Thank you, Ella, for the presentation. We're excited to see progress here. Now we'll move to action item number 6, which is consideration and approval to disperse funds for OPC's equity plan implementation. This is an important item that would advance our goal number 2 of the strategic plan, specifically focused on advancing equity across our ocean and coastal policies and actions. And on this item, we're glad to welcome Maria Rodriguez, one of our program managers.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Maria Rodriguez. I'm OPC's Climate and Environmental Justice Program Manager. So today I am super excited to present on item 6, the consideration and approval to disperse funds to support OPC's equity plan implementation. And just really briefly before I continue, I do want to follow up on Councilmember Jackson's comment on who we are referring to when we talk about environmental justice communities. And I'm just going to read the definition that we used in our equity plan. We are referring to communities that are environmentally and economically stressed, that experience environmental health inequities, which contribute to persistent environmental health disparities. And due to a lot of discriminatory zoning practices like redlining, that Black and Brown communities have been the most impacted. So we do rely on mapping tools to identify communities such as Cal Screen and the Community Parks Finder, so along some others. So, next slide. So for background, our equity plan was adopted last year at our October council meeting. The plan represents OPC's comprehensive commitments to advancing equity across ocean and coastal policies and actions in California, and strengthening internal efforts to create a more inclusive workplace at OPC. It was developed collaboratively with OPC staff and leadership, our grantee, the Better World Group advisors, OPC's Environmental Justice Advisory Group, and with feedback from the public and state agency partners. It reflects collective action by all relevant partners and contains 4 overarching goals focused on the following core areas: engagement, inclusive workplace, policy, and science, with objectives, strategies, and actions that advance equity and justice within the state and the council. Next slide, please. Today, staff is recommending the council approve next steps to support implementation of the equity plan through a continued partnership with the Better World Group advisors. This includes the council's consideration and approval to disperse up to $540,000 to advance equity plan implementation. The primary goal for this effort is to provide support and capacity for local and regional community partners to actively participate in ocean and coastal conservation, decision-making, and policy efforts to ensure OPC's work is equitably informed by California communities and providing meaningful benefits to them. As a grantee, the Better World Group Advisors brings a deep understanding of the opportunities and challenges unique to building community consensus on priorities and recommendations, and translating those unique needs into actionable policies at the state. The grantee will apply this expertise to ensure that the diversity of perspectives and needs of California's communities can be effectively and meaningfully implemented across OPC's strategic equity initiatives. This effort will be a 3-year grant leading up to the plan's biannual assessment at the 2-year mark to report on the plan's progress, and wrapping up with a synthesis of recommendations, including identification of needs, gaps, and other resources to sustain implementation beyond this grant cycle and into the long term. Next slide, please. The recommended action addresses our strategic plan goal 2, advance equity across ocean and coastal policies and actions, specifically objective 2.2, enhance engagement with underserved communities. And we aim to enhance engagement opportunities through 1, working collaboratively with equity and environmental justice partners statewide, as well as interagency partners identified in the plan, to advance community-informed implementation of the plan in a way that best reflects the needs of under-resourced California communities. And also by 2, improving equitable access and providing support for community partners to actively engage, inform decision-making, and benefit from coastal and ocean conservation and policy efforts. Next slide, please. This effort will inform select policy objectives and strategies from our equity plan, supporting the following outcomes: providing expertise on community engagement approaches for OPC projects, reviewing application evaluation criteria and scoring approaches for OPC funding opportunities in order to prioritize and advance projects that provide meaningful benefits to under-resourced communities, cross-collaborating with OPC partners to inform the development and scope of our pilot environmental justice small grants program, working closely with our staff and community-based partners to advise on the development of our environmental justice policy, providing timely updates, feedback, or analysis at OPC council meetings to report on implementation progress. Next slide, please. Developing pathways for direct engagement with public members representing environmental justice and tribal communities that can provide recommendations to help us best implement the equity plan. Establish partnerships with environmental justice communities and tribes to identify regional priorities and recommendations on how best to implement actions that address the impacts of climate change. Providing guidance on the implementation of California's 30 by 30 initiative with a focus on equity, opportunity, and improving human health in the context of conserving ocean biodiversity. Next slide, please. Additional outcomes also include providing equity and environmental justice expertise alongside community partners in scoping science and research projects to inform research questions, working with OPC's science advisory team and community partners to co-develop region-specific metrics and equity indicators for community health and resilience to inform OPC's annual Coast and Ocean report, helping OPC develop metrics to evaluate equity plan implementation progress and reporting approaches. And lastly, as I mentioned, this project will also develop a final biannual assessment that highlights implementation progress, accepts accountability for existing gaps, and identifies resource needs. We know that in order to have meaningful implementation, it does include critical evaluation of our progress to better understand barriers and challenges communities face to actively engage in coastal and ocean policy efforts. So we do look forward to working closely with community partners to integrate community-informed needs across our work and ensure that recommendations to improve engagement and other equity investments can be sustained in the long run. Next slide. So to conclude, staff recommends the council approve the disbursement of up to $540,000 to the Better World Group advisors for equity plan implementation. As noted, this action addresses objective 2.2, enhance engagement with underserved communities within goal 2 of our strategic plan. Next slide. Thank you for your consideration and time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Maria. We'll first move to public comment, and I'll ask Holly if there's any commenters in the queue.
There are no commenters for this item.
Okay, thanks. Well, first, I want to just applaud you and the team on your progress here. We talk a lot internally about operationalizing equity. So it's one thing to lift it up as a priority. It's another thing to figure out how we reshape our processes, our investments to actually achieve better equity. And so I'm excited about the investment and the partnership with Better World Group to really focus on implementation and to institutionalize these practices. And I think it's going to make a big difference for supporting all communities across California's coast. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to the progress. Others? Jim.
Just briefly, thank you very much. First of all, applaud your work. The Assembly members actually, it was thrilling to see this because the Assembly member is currently working on legislation on offshore wind, AB 80 and the OPC. And some questions arose during that process, during the legislative process about equity in terms of that legislation. So she was thrilled to see how much work and thought the OPC had put into this subject matter as it relates to the ocean, because a lot of people take that for granted, the communities on the coast. So thank you very much for the work and the thought you've put into this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Alexis.
Yeah, and I just add to that, agree, the work should be applauded, and also the importance of the biennial assessment and the fact that it not only adds a level of accountability, but also an ability to pivot when we're falling short and to change our actions. So that ability to be adaptive in the same way that we do for our conservation work is equally important in this space.
Totally. That's why we wanted to create that and make sure that we also have recommendations for refinements that we need to make in the plan moving forward.
Yeah, I always talk about the fact that we're proud of our progress with a lot of work ahead and that we're on a journey. So I would imagine I speak for all the council members when I say we're really interested in in updates on the equity plan, on operationalizing the equity plan and lessons learned. Because while I think I'm excited by the plan, we know that we're going to learn a lot and continue to adapt the way we do our work to truly achieve the equity we know we need to. Excellent. Then I would entertain a motion to approve disbursement of funding for the OPC equity plan implementation. Anybody want to move that?
So moved.
Okay. Then Governor Katie, I may look to you as a seconder here.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Holly, please call the roll.
Secretary Crowfoot.
Aye.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis.
Aye.
Katie Landau.
Aye.
Megan Rocha.
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Aye.
The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Thanks so much, Maria, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And all of your work. All right, we're going to move on to item number 7, which is another action item. And specifically, it's the consideration and approval to disperse funds to accelerate kelp research and restoration efforts. This has been a topic of attention and concern over the last 3.5 years while I've been here, given the collapse of our coastal kelp population. And here to present on this item, we have Mike Eckerle, Senior Program Manager.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot, council members, Mike Eckerle, Senior Biodiversity Program Manager, and Tribal Liaison here at OPC. And today, I'm really excited to present this new initiative that I think is going to really significantly accelerate our efforts that the Secretary just talked about to protect and restore kelp in California. So next slide, please. Yeah. Oh man, I got a whole email about this. I was going to do it right. Okay. Is that better? Okay, so as we know, and as we've talked about before here at many council meetings, kelp forests are fundamental to California's biodiversity and to our ocean economy. But we also know that as the climate is changing, kelp is under threat, right? So we've seen decimation on our north coast, more than 95% of bull kelp lost from 2014 to 2019. Story's a little bit more complex on the central and the south coast, but again, some areas of very concerning declines like Monterey and the Channel Islands. So next slide, please. But I'm really proud to say that OPC has stepped up, right? In partnership with our sister agencies, we have taken really bold action over the last couple of years to get out in front of this, to see what we can do to be proactive. So in 2021, we released a kelp action plan that contained a whole set of those proactive strategies for how we are going to protect and restore kelp in the face of changing ocean conditions. We've also invested, as Jenn mentioned in her executive director's report, more than $3.5 million in kelp forest monitoring, improving our scientific understanding of the problem, and also testing out potential restoration approaches to see what works and what doesn't. And that investment has included the launch of a statewide kelp recovery research program. And so this really groundbreaking program, this set of 6 solutions-oriented research projects is delivering some really exciting outcomes that are going to be publicly available in June. I really can't wait for those to hit the streets. But just a little bit of a preview here. So we now have science-based guidance for optimizing restoration location and timing, which is really cool. We have results from in-water testing of various kelp enhancement methods like outplanting and seeding. We've created a bull kelp seed bank to help preserve the genetic diversity of this threatened species. We've also got really sophisticated models that consider both human factors and ecological factors to help us make better management decisions. So I'm really, really excited about those results. Next slide, please. So now it's time to start implementing what we've learned, right? And it's also time to start filling some of those remaining gaps in our knowledge. So can we predict how ocean conditions are going to impact kelp in any given year? What can we learn by studying places where kelp is actually recovering naturally on its own without human intervention? And importantly, how do we weave together Western science and indigenous traditional knowledges to benefit these vitally important ecosystems that also have cultural importance to tribes? Next slide, please. So to implement what we've learned, to address some of these research needs, and to support action while a much longer term kelp restoration and management plan is being developed by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and also to promote really a no regrets, learn by doing approach to kelp conservation, which really has been our approach for the last couple of years. This new project will build upon those successes of the kelp recovery research program, really accelerating and scaling up kelp science and restoration as well in California. So next slide, please. The program that we envision is going to support new research and restoration through a partnership with California Sea Grant that will result in a competitive call administered by Sea Grant. And some of our top priorities for this competitive call include restoration work that's informed by best available science and lessons learned through that kelp recovery research program and other efforts. Further scientific investigation of risks and benefits of some of these more emerging restoration methods that need further tests. Work that supports the development of new ecosystem-based management strategies for kelp, especially to support that kelp restoration and management plan. And really importantly, research and restoration projects that put impacted communities like divers, fishermen, and local tribes at the forefront of this effort. Next slide, please. And we're going big. So today I'm recommending that the council approve the disbursement of $5.4 million to Sea Grant to support this new program. Of that, we'll have $5 million available for research and restoration projects to be awarded competitively, and then $400,000 will support Sea Grant's administrative costs to help us run the program. And if the council approves this funding, OPC and Sea Grant will work together to release a request for proposals in July, with selected proposals being brought to the council in December, along with an updated kelp action plan for approval as one big package. And the goal would be to have projects hit the water in early 2024. So as fast as we possibly can. And I really want to emphasize that OPC and Sea Grant will highly encourage all of our applicants to integrate justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in a way that supports our equity plan, our tribal engagement strategy, to really be thoughtful as well and meaningful about how they are integrating those best practices. Next slide, please. So I'll just wrap up by paraphrasing my good friend and colleague, James Ray, who led the department's work on kelp for several years, who I got a chance to work with. This is a really intimidating problem, but James refused to be kind of daunted by the magnitude of this crisis. And he would say, hey, this is California. We've got decision makers who really care. We've got the best kelp scientists in the world, and we've got impacted communities who are really showing up and saying, hey, we want to be part of this effort. So if we can't do it here, it basically just can't be done. So let's go get it done. Thanks for your consideration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions after public comment.
Thank you, Mike. Really encouraging end to that presentation. We would then now invite public comment. And we have a public commenter here in the room. And then after that, we'll ask Holly to call on folks virtually. Welcome.
Hi, I am super excited to be here today. I had the opportunity to actually be here in person. I usually attend online, so it's cool to be here in person. My name is Annie Bauer-Civiello. I am the Restoration Program Director for the Reef Check Foundation. And I'm here just to support everything that Mike said. I don't know if I need to tell you guys, but we're a citizen science organization that monitors the kelp forests across the entire coast from Baja, California, all the way to Washington. And we're made up of over 100 volunteers across the whole coastline who care about these kelp forests. And we have the unique opportunity to see firsthand how these kelp forests are changing over time. We have almost 18 years of data in California specifically. So the kelp forests are changing, and they're changing rapidly, and they're changing now, and we need to do something about it. We actually were recipients of the OPC funding in 2020 that I know Mike presented on last year or in June. And I just want to reiterate this and stress how important that was to restoration science, getting the community involved, all of our volunteers involved, and understanding how our restoration can impact the kelp forests. But I think that funding is great for science and short term, like learning more what we can do about it, but also not stopping there, not having short-term funding 1 to 2 years and then stopping, and then we don't have enough funding. We have to scramble to find more funding to continue these sites. So I'm here to stress that this is super important. I'm fully in support of all this. I think it's awesome, and that's it.
Well, huge thanks for all that you've done and all Reef Check has done. You've been an absolute partner to us in the last couple of years getting to where we are. So thank you.
Thank you.
Holly, do we have other commenters in the queue?
We do. We're going to start with Bill Romanelli, followed by David Goldenberg, and then Keith Rutzart. Bill, you have the floor. Looks like you're still muted, Bill.
How about now? Better?
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot and commission members, or council members. Just 3 quick points I want to make. First of all, really just so thrilled with the work that the staff has done on this. As somebody who's been diving off the coast of California for more than 30 years and, has just been so heartbroken by the devastation of the kelp forest, I am just so pleased with the rapid response that our state has done on this really important issue. Wanted to just pose the question. I don't know if it's in part of the plans for kelp restoration or not, but to the degree that such programs as diver funded or diver supported purple urchin calling or efforts to help create a more viable purple urchin market. It seems to me all the restoration in the world is going to be great, but if we don't take away the threat posed by the urchins out there, I just want to make sure that's not being overlooked. So that's the sum of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I'll pose that as a question to Mike, because I'm also interested in that question around purple urchin removal. Next.
Our next speaker is going to be David Goldenberg, followed by Keith. David, you have the floor.
Lieutenant Governor Kunalaka, Secretary Crowfoot, Executive Director Eckerle, council members, staff, and guests. I am David Goldenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the California Sea Urchin Commission, a state marketing program overseen by the California Department of Food and Agriculture and also the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The California Sea Urchin Commission supports the implementation of Action Item 7. The California Sea Urchin Commission looks forward to the opportunity to propose a collaborative project with the OPC, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Fish and Game, the Sea Grant, and marine scientists to apply an adaptive management solution to restore kelp in state conservation areas. We propose to employ trained and licensed sea urchin divers using scientific methodologies to conduct surveys and use various techniques to create a biodiverse environment to stimulate kelp recovery. We will conclude with a science-based and peer-reviewed final report. Thank you. That's a very short and mouthful to say, but we fully support what the efforts of Mr. Eckerle has proposed and all the past efforts that have been taking place, and we look forward to stepping up and taking our place with the others that have been working on this kelp restoration work for these number of years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for the commission's engagement and interest in helping lead a solution.
Next speaker is going to be Keith Rutzart, followed by Richard Sadowski. Keith, you have the floor.
Thank you, council members, for the opportunity to address item 7, the kelp restoration grants. My name is Keith Rutzart, and I'm the founder of the Giant Kelp Restoration Project in Monterey. This is my 6th year of doing kelp restoration in Monterey. We are the only successful kelp restoration project north of Santa Barbara, but we have been in a holding pattern since Labor Day of 2021. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for your comment that small NGOs are disadvantaged in competitive call grant applications. I agree. This disbursement has the same indicators as the previous distributions, where all the money is actually allocated and small community-driven efforts will miss out. As stated, OPC has spent $3.5 million on North Coast efforts that have failed to restore kelp, while our successful community effort was unfunded by the OPC. We have received $0 from the state, and we are grateful. The reason we are successful in our work is because we are doing it in a place with an existing perennial kelp forest, and because we jumped the shark. We are self-funded, and we do what needs to be done to restore kelp. We would rather obtain funds from people that believe in our successful approach. I'm glad the NGOs are lobbying hard and moving in this general direction to keep kelp restoration in the public space, but the timeline is skipping this year. We don't need your money, but we need your policy. We need anyone in a position of authority to say out loud that kelp restoration is policy, that learning by doing means actually doing things that benefit biodiversity and kelp forest ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'll pose a question to Mike when we get to that point on this question around access to the funding. I note that we have a commenter in the room, so I want to just call on Jennifer, and then Holly, we'll go back to you on the queue.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for not being Jenny on the spot a couple minutes ago. But I am in fact a Jennifer Fearing, and I am speaking today on behalf of the Monterey Bay Aquarium and the Nature Conservancy, and strong support of this item. And also just to flag for what some of you are aware of, but to get it on the record here, that we are co-sponsoring legislation, Assembly Bill 1407, that is authored by one of our new OPC members, Assemblywoman Dawn Addis, that would, we think, complement and make possible this kind of investment and restoration, not just of kelp forests, but also eelgrass and oyster beds and other critical ecosystems in the ocean off our coast that need specific attention and a lot of investment. 5.4 million is incredible, and just really the tip of the iceberg about what these 90% declined habitats really need. So we are enthusiastically engaged with OPC and other state agencies around making sure we get the policy in that bill right, but I think it's highly supportive of what you're talking about here today, and could hopefully result in significant more resources to take these actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Holly, back to you.
Last virtual speaker is going to be Richard Sadowski. Mr. Sadowski, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. This is Richard Sadowski, Homefront EJ Morro Bay. And we fully support this item, and thank Michael for his excellent presentation and the work that he's done. And just to follow up on one of the speakers earlier mentioned the citizen science and the need for continual funding. That is such an imperative. And I'd also like to mention the efforts that were done by Jared, former Secretary of EPA, and Michael going out diving with regard with the purple urchin issue. And, maybe, keep in mind and being able to lace some funding into this program for the local diving community in helping this project. And once again, thank you for such an informative and a great presentation.
Thank you very much, as always, Richard. Holly, that concludes public comment.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, listen, I'll just provide a little context for our newest council members. From my recollection, this topic has elicited more public comment and public concern than almost any other in the last 3.5 years on the OPC. And we had divers actually well before COVID, when we weren't even virtual, coming to us and in tears because of an beyond alarming collapse of the kelp forests. And at that time, we talked a lot about the purple urchin generating these urchin barrens and just the complete disappearance of kelp over whole swaths of our coast. And I have to give our team and the staff great credit for not sitting and suggesting that we do a lot of analysis before we took action. This was very much a research in action. And as I recall, partnering with Reef Check, we actually helped divers get out into the waters and use different methods to remove or destroy purple urchin to understand how methods worked toward restoring kelp along with the other science. So exciting to understand that we're now thinking and considering a much larger tranche of funding, both science, but also continued action taking. So my first question to you, Mike, would be, where does this all of this leave us as it relates to purple urchin removal? And if you could, for everybody, including myself, remind us of why the purple urchin are harmful on the kelp versus red urchin, et cetera.
Yeah, so we had a warm water event in 2014, actually from 2014 to 2016, that caused a whole slew of ecological changes. And one of those changes was an explosion in purple sea urchin populations. Some debate about why that happened. There was kind of a massive boom in their numbers to begin with, but also they lost a key predator to sea star wasting disease, which scientists think was linked to climate. So it was very much a climate-driven change. Urchins, some people think they're invasive. They're not. They're part of the natural ecosystem, but the ecosystem is very much out of balance. And purple sea urchins eat kelp. They're the ones that really exploded. We also have red urchins, which are commercially fished. They didn't explode in quite the same way. And in fact, their numbers really declined. They got outcompeted by the purples. And so the commercial red sea urchin fishery was similarly very, very negatively affected by kelp collapse. So purple urchin removal is a restoration technique, right? When you think about kelp restoration, you don't just need to think about actually putting plants in the water. I mean, sometimes all you need to do is remove the urchins, get them down to numbers that are kind of closer to where they're supposed to be in that ecological balance. And the kelp can come back on its own. So we saw that in the project that Annie was talking about, where we sent out these commercial red sea urchin divers who really are the best. They're way better than I would be, or way better than, most scientists would be at collecting urchins to remove those purples. And in one spot, we did in fact see kelp coming back. So we have some demonstration that works. And also Keith, Mr. Rootsart was commenting, he's led a really successful effort with recreational divers culling purple urchins at Tankers Reef in Monterey, and they've successfully seen some kelp regrowth as well. So quick urchin 101, but yeah, let's not lose sight of the fact that sometimes it is important to control those numbers as part of kelp restoration.
And so my question, with this next tranche of $5 million, sounds like part of that will fill certain information gaps and scientific gaps. Are you retaining this focus on science? Yes, but also action taking?
100%. Yeah. So we purposely did not allocate like X% should go to restoration, X% to research, because we want to see what projects we get. And ideally, I mean, a perfect project would combine them, right? A perfect project would be, here's some restoration work, and we're going to try to learn some stuff from it. We're going to scale up, but we're also going to keep, informing those knowledge gaps that I talked about earlier. So while the funding is allocated to California Sea Grant, that's just so that they can run the competitive call. So we will be working very closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to review all the applications that come in, again, really prioritizing not just science, but action. right? And action at a scale that makes sense based on what we know right now. And also community involvement too. So be that local tribes, like I said, or the incredible, manpower, person power that the Monterey Dive community represents. We're very much into all that.
So my second question would be, how do you respond to concerns that small entities or volunteer-led entities may have difficulty securing this funding because presumably, complicated state grant requirements? How are you going to actually make sure we follow through on that commitment to inclusion and accessibility of the funding?
Yeah, well, I think ultimately we'd love to have technical assistance for all of our OPC, as much of our OPC competitive funding as we possibly can. I mean, I'll certainly be working really closely with Megan to make sure lessons learned from what she's doing, we can inform this RFP because we're just getting it off the ground. I know Sea Grant's thinking about the same thing as well. And for projects that come in, we're not just looking at funding the big universities to do academic projects, right? Again, we really do want to see projects that are community-based. So I could entertain, if we see proposals, for example, that have high potential, perhaps there's some way we can work with Sea Grant to say, okay, this community-based organization seems like they needed a little bit of assistance. How can we provide that to get kind of the broadest, cast the broadest net that we can?
Great. And the last question from me, one of the commenters referenced policy. Is there anything we need to be doing on the policy front as we invest in science and restoration?
I think that, so the updated Kelp Action Plan that we present in December, I think should have more of maybe a more detailed answer to this, but I would actually argue that kelp protection and restoration is our policy. It's in our strategic plan. It's objective 3.2, protect and restore kelp ecosystems, protect and restore, right? And so I think there are a lot of questions to navigate around where and when. Marine protected areas has been a big policy question, for example. But I think that the state in writing and then in action, everything that we've done over the last 3 years has demonstrated that we believe in this as a policy, and it's really just about figuring out the details.
Thank you, Mike. Other questions or comments from council members? Megan.
Yeah, I would just like to say, obviously on the North Coast, we've seen just devastation, right, of our kelp forest. And so I'm really pleased that OPC did jump in. So I just like to echo what the secretary said to try to really take action. And I also really appreciate the focus on restoration and not just research. And I do encourage, as a possible suggestion, through the grant process, offering an opportunity for letters of intent first, rather than a full proposal. Oftentimes that can help address some of those small capacity needs, right, without having to do a lot of upfront work. But it also potentially gives Sea Grant an opportunity to find partnerships or where projects may overlap and connect people, and then request them to work together to submit a full proposal. So
yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Agreed. Alexis.
Yeah, so I feel like the work on kelp restoration is really key to advancing the state's biodiversity and also climate goals. And I think that this action is well balanced in that it says we need to fill information gaps, we need to understand, and that's where research comes in. But how and where can we act in the absence of imperfect information when the magnitude of the threat warrants it? And in this case, making the decision to act now and not being too prescriptive, to your point about whether we're going to do a certain number of research versus in-water restoration actions, I think is a smart one. And then I think that this work continues to also emphasize not only the importance of state agency collaborations, but also leveraging capacity from stakeholders. There are researchers across the state and nonprofit and tribal entities who are really leading on this, and this is an opportunity to really weave together and make an additive impact. So I think it's just the right step.
Thank you, Alexis. Okay, then I would recommend that we consider action or motion to approve disbursement of funds to accelerate kelp research and restoration. Megan.
that motion.
Thank you. Moved by Megan.
Second.
Seconded by the Lieutenant Governor. Holly, please call the roll.
Secretary Crowfoot.
Aye.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis.
Aye.
Katie Landau.
Aye.
Megan Rocha.
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Aye.
The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to progress on this urgent crisis. Let's move to action item number 8, which is consideration and approval to disperse funding for a statewide groundfish sampling program. And to present with us today, we have Program Manager Noah Benadere.
Good afternoon.
Benadere. Adere. Oh,
good.
I leaned over and asked Jenn for pronunciation. Benadere.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, council members. Thanks so much for this opportunity. I'm Noah Benadere. I'm OPC Sustainable Fisheries and Aquaculture Program Manager. And today I'm going to be presenting, thank you. Presenting on a proposal to develop a statewide cooperative groundfish sampling program. Next slide, please. Before I get started, I really want to just emphasize the amount of work that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife puts into managing California's fisheries sustainably and in developing new methods to enhance that sustainability of management. But as we work to really enhance the resiliency of our fisheries in the state, the need to assess our fish stocks also increases. And when I say assess fish stocks, I'm talking about formal stock assessment, which is a rigorous scientific process applied to figuring out how many fish you can accurately catch and maintain a sustainable fishery. And these assessment results really drive management actions. And those management actions have impacts on associated communities that rely on fish stocks for either recreation or commercial activity. And what we really see is that when you have assessments based on robust biological data, it really leads to wider stakeholder acceptance of those assessment results. And for a good example, if you reference what happened in 2021 with copper and quillback rockfish stock assessment, the results of those assessments showed that the fisheries were actually in worse shape than we thought they were, and that led to really drastic reductions in bag limits. However, due to lack of certain life history data parameters throughout this certain segments of the state, those assessments were listed as data limited, which really opened them up to criticism from stakeholders. So next slide, please. However, as a positive side, it created an opportunity for partnerships. And so there was a joint effort between the Sport Fishing Association of California, the Southwest Fisheries Science Center in Santa Cruz, as well as commercial sport fishing operators from throughout the state to develop a cooperative sampling program as a pilot project that focused specifically on recreationally caught copper and quillback rockfish from certain operations. And science staff at SAC and at NOAA actually went out and, if you reference the pictures up on top, they trained crew members aboard these vessels on how to accurately sample and measure recreationally caught fish, so from the anglers that were already paying to be on board. Crew members then would bag the fish, take measurements, freeze them, and then actually ship them by UPS to the Southwest Fisheries Science Center lab in Santa Cruz for further processing. Next slide, please. And besides just collecting more data, when you do cooperative fish sampling, what you really do is that you're able to increase engagement as well as increase opportunities for data collection. Because you're incorporating anglers and vessel crews into the data collection process, you're really just building a mechanism for communication. You are now having your stakeholders intimately engage with scientists, and because of that, you're increasing transparency as well as just baseline trust in the scientific process. As an additional benefit, you're able to reach, because you're using the crews of those vessels, you're able to reach areas and fishing locations that are normally either skipped or difficult to sample via traditional sampling programs. And because you're taking fish that are already being caught recreationally, you're really increasing your overall sampling efficiency, and you're reducing the amount of fish that are needed to be culled biologically for sample collection. Next slide. So what this program seeks to do is to expand this pilot project statewide. Through leveraging partnerships with the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program. That is our fearless leader, Jeneckerly, with a link on a CCFRP trip last year. CCFRP is a really successful MPA monitoring program that partners with volunteer anglers and sport fishing operations statewide to collect data on fish biomass and population health from inside and outside of MPAs. In addition to the MPA management, CCFRP data is actually already used in several stock assessments. And so what this program seeks to do is to expand capacity within the overall CCFRP program so that regional staff will work with vessel crews from sport fishing operations in each sampling region to train them on how to collect samples. CCFRP staff will then process those samples and then send the data to the Department of Fish and Wildlife and to the Southwest Fisheries Science Center for further analysis. And as an added benefit, all of the biological samples that are taken in this program will be publicly available for further research in sort of a sample library. Next slide. And so we're recommending today is that the council authorize the disbursement of up to $450,000 to CCFRP to further develop and implement the statewide cooperative groundfish sampling program. And the funds will specifically go to expanding CCFRP capacity to collect and aggregate and process cooperatively sampled fishes with the larger goal of filling these data gaps in life history and population structure that are really needed to improve stock assessments, to expand the sustainability of harvest for our state fisheries, and really further our understanding of climate impacts on California groundfish fisheries. And as an additional note, what this program does is establishes a framework. So it's not limited specifically to groundfish. You now have a framework that can be adapted to tackle any fisheries problem through recreational fish sampling, because once the crew members are trained, you already have a community science asset that's out there. And so what this program falls under objective 3.3 of OPC strategic plan, which is to support sustainable marine fisheries and thriving fish and wildlife populations. So next slide. With that, thanks for your time and attention, and welcome any questions.
Thanks so much, Noah. Let's move to public comment. And Holly, I'll ask you if anyone is in the virtual queue.
There is no one in the virtual queue for this item.
Great. Well, I'll commend the program as a really efficient way to collect important scientific information and data, and two, a great opportunity for scientists and anglers to collaborate. So I think it seems like it's a win-win. And I would say for council members, if you yourself want to witness this in person, I know our OPC staff on an annual basis recruits us as council members out to actually witness this commercial fisheries count in person.
Witness and participate.
Witness and participate. Did Director Eckerle catch that fish, or did she just posing?
You better believe it. I think I strive to beat Mike Eckerle. He catches the teeniest fish and then I catch the biggest one. We'll show pictures at the next council meeting.
In all seriousness, it's a great opportunity to actually get out there on the ocean and meet anglers and scientists. So we will extend that invitation to council members. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just, again, want to say this is one of the strengths of the OPC is data collection and gathering information. Neither we nor the other regulatory bodies of the state of California can pass policies if we don't have the data. So this is exciting. And so long as you can add collection, analysis, and potentially eating some of the subjects of the study to the list, count me in.
Thank you very much. Alexis.
But sign me up as well. I do miss being in the field. And I think my initial reaction to this as a geneticist, like, ooh, better spatial and temporal resolution of like data, like, yes, samples. But I think it's also just important to make sure that we have the longevity of kind of like the monitoring data that's available for these fisheries. You started to intimate at it, Noah, but I think thinking about how we use this pilot to truly scale across fisheries, right? Groundfish are one of many data poor fisheries in the state. And so thinking about how we can kind of quickly get to setting up these kind of programs and figuring out what the prioritization or phase-in would be for choosing those fisheries, I think will be a really important next step.
I definitely agree. It's sort of ongoing conversations between the stock assessment scientists, OPC staff, and then also the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you. Great comments. I would entertain a motion to approve this disbursement of funding for a statewide groundfish sampling program.
So moved.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
I'll second.
Seconded by Dr. Jackson. Holly, please call the roll.
Secretary Crowfoot.
Aye.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis.
Aye.
Katie Landau.
Aye.
Megan Rocha.
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Aye.
The council has voted unanimously and the motion passes.
Thanks so much. Our last action item, which is we'll proceed our final public comment on non-agenda items. This action item is consideration and approval to disperse funds for offshore wind environmental monitoring guidance. And this is important to advance our strategic plan goal number 4, all around advancing a sustainable blue economy. And also very important given the priority that our administration, our policymakers, the federal administration are putting on the development of offshore wind. And to present this item, we have Yi-Wei Wang, one of our program managers. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot and council members. My name is Yi-Wei Wang, the Offshore Wind Program Manager for OPC, and I'm super excited today to present item 9. Next slide, please. So for background, to achieve California's carbon neutrality goals, offshore wind development has emerged as a key strategy and progressed rapidly in recent years. In August last year, the California Energy Commission adopted offshore wind energy goals of 225 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. And these energy goals are part of a larger strategic planning effort for offshore wind development in federal waters as required by AB 525 that the Energy Commission is leading in coordination with agency partners. And in parallel with the long-term strategic planning process, offshore wind development in already established wind energy areas have been proceeding at a rapid pace. In December, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, conducted its first ever offshore wind energy auction along the California coastline for 5 lease areas. And these lease areas have the potential to generate up to 4.6 gigawatts of wind energy. And as you can see on the left, they are 2 lease areas of the northern coast near Humboldt Bay, and the 3 of the central coast near Morro Bay. And after BOEM issues the leases in coming weeks, the next step in the process is the site assessment phase, involving collecting project-specific information through surveys and studies and submitting the site assessment plan. And this phase can take up to 5 years for leases. And based on these timelines, it's likely that the construction of offshore wind development in California will begin in the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide, please. And because of the deep ocean and steep slope, offshore wind projects in California require floating structures anchored to the seabed. And in the right panel, you can see 4 different floating turbine designs. And currently, only a small proportion, about 0.1 gigawatts of operating offshore wind farms worldwide use floating structures compared to about 50 gigawatts of fixed bottom structures. Because of limited information from existing projects and unique marine ecosystems in California, potential environmental impact of floating offshore wind development in California are not well understood, and existing environmental monitoring guidance are not sufficient in providing a framework to monitor and evaluate local and cumulative impacts of offshore wind projects over their lifespan. So there is an urgent need identified by OPC, the Coastal Commission, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Land Commission, and the Energy Commission, along with external partners, to develop a comprehensive environmental monitoring guidance that is tailored to offshore wind development in California. Next slide. So comprehensive environmental monitoring guidance should cover priority questions and needs, specific design recommendations, evaluation of data for permits and policies, and recommended protocols for data sharing, analysis, and interpretation. The guidance development will need direction from an advisory committee of experts. Examples of expertise will include, but are not limited to, marine mammals and sea turtles, birds and bats, oceanography processes, marine ecosystem and habitats, and fisheries. It also needs to be coordinated with other efforts and engaging with stakeholders and the public. And this guidance will serve as a roadmap for how the state will develop and implement a comprehensive monitoring program to understand and address any potential impact from offshore wind development and implementation. Next slide. OPC staff is seeking approval for up to $450,000 to fund the development of comprehensive environmental monitoring guidance. And the proposed project aligns with OPC's strategic plan objective 4.4. And we plan to lease a competitive solicitation to find the appropriate grantee or fund discretionarily if a suitable grantee isn't identified. I want to point out that we made a small revision last week to the originally posted staff recommendation to build in flexibility to disperse funds discretionarily should the competitive process fail to identify an appropriate grantee. And we expect to initiate the project this fall with the goal of completing the guidance within the 2 years. Next slide. And thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you for that presentation. Let's move to public comment. And seeing nobody here in the room to provide public comment, Holly, do we have anyone in the virtual queue?
We have a couple in the virtual queue. First is going to be Richard Sadowski, followed by Ricky Erickson, and now David Kasheta. Mr. Sadowski, you have the floor.
Richard Sadowski, Homefront, EJ, Morro Bay. I think that we need to have a sense of urgency with the development of the offshore wind farms if we are to achieve the decarbonizing goals that have been set. And one of the things that part of that project is the supporting infrastructure. For instance, in Morro Bay, we are a safe harbor. If we could work with the, at the same time, looking at offshore wind and the supporting infrastructure, bringing in the boats or the necessary for the delivering of the crews, and we'll be addressing sea level rise. All that is as a support for that project, but it needs to be happening at the same time. And then also these are opportunities for like local fishermen and scientists to gather, get jobs in the meantime. So I think that we need to have a sense of more of an urgency in moving this along. And I appreciate the presentation and support the funding for this project.
Thank you, Richard.
Next speaker is going to be Ricky Erickson, followed by David Kasheta. Ricky, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. This is Ricky Erickson, Director of Marine Programs for the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, speaking in support of dispersing funds for environmental monitoring guidance for offshore wind development in California. California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, in partnership with leading scientific experts and Southwell Environmental Associates, just completed the marine mammal and sea turtle vulnerability assessment to offshore wind impacts for the West Coast. Together, we applaud the leadership of California in moving us towards sustainable sources of energy. To hit clean energy targets that are among the most ambitious in the world, California will have to foster construction of renewable generating capacity faster than ever before. And the recent lease sales have rapidly accelerated planning for offshore wind development and construction. Given the rapid evolution in technology for floating offshore wind in deep and often inclement weather conditions off our coast, we would like to voice our concern about a mismatching of timescales for monitoring. While we understand that developing rigorous monitoring guidance will take time, expert guidance already exists. Therefore, we urge allocation of discretionary funding to commence monitoring as soon as possible in the interim. Waiting 2 years to begin marine life monitoring for completion of this monitoring guidance will delay acquisition of data critical to make informed decisions. Thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration and time as we face these challenges together.
Thank you, Dr. Erickson.
Next speaker is David Kashetta, and that will be the last speaker for this item. David, you have the floor. It looks like you're still muted.
Hi, council member, staff. My name is Dave Kashetta. Thanks for having me. And short and sweet, I just wanted to address you to the how many studies have been done about whale migration and movement that will be affected by these wind farms. That's it. I know it's a big issue back east, and our concern is the leases here off California. How is it going to affect that? That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Holly, any other public comment?
That is it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Well, I would first just indicate the critical importance of environmental monitoring and environmental analysis. I think many of us and our policymakers are really excited with the potential of offshore wind to meet our clean energy and climate goals. And at the same time, we have to move forward in a thoughtful way that truly understands impacts, both environmental and economic. So broadly speaking, I think this is a step in the right direction. I would note Dr. Erickson's concern around timing and wanting to move as quickly as possible on at least some important data collection, prior to this technology being put in place. And I wonder, I'd turn to Director Eckerle and just to address that question around timing. And is that a major concern for you as really my key point person at the agency, ensuring all of these interests are taken into account as we advance offshore wind?
Thank you, Secretary. And no, we absolutely do not need to wait 2 years to have this guidance in place. If there are priority monitoring needs that we identify, and we could probably list them off right now, we will make near-term investments to make sure that moves forward while we are developing this more comprehensive guidance.
That's really helpful. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Well, I consider this to be a very exciting step forward, concrete step forward, as California continues to advance this very important energy source for our state. As you noted in your presentation, we have a goal of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind off the coast in 7 years from now. And environmental review, of course, is going to be part of this process. So getting a head start, getting out there, doing our independent analysis of what these impacts might be that would need to be mitigated and understood is critical. And there is so much riding on California's ability to actually deliver this energy source, that for the OPC to be allocating resources to start that concrete effort of environmental analysis is very, very important. So I'll be voting yes on this vote. And thank you to staff.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for that and for your leadership on all things offshore wind. Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you very much for all the hard work on this. It's really great that the OPC is digging in on this. I referred earlier to a piece of legislation my boss, Assemblymember Addis, is carrying. I won't go through that again, but I will say that the OPC is just the right place for this. At the science-based focus on protecting the oceans and the coast. So thank you for that. And also, this is, while we have to prepare and we have to do all this work ahead of the turbines actually going in the water, this is decades of work. Monitoring will not just be the next 6 years. It's going to be when they're in the ocean, and on a continuous basis. So this is just the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of us talk about us being in a race against climate change. And so we need to deploy technology like this quickly, at the same time, thoughtfully. And so just to share that our agency is really focused on ensuring coordination, not only between the OPC and the California Energy Commission, but also the State Coastal Commission, which has done a great job in its role, considering this development as well as its impacts, as well as the State Lands Commission, of course, Lieutenant Governor. Really important that all interests, be it tribal interests and environmental interests and economic interests, actually be at the table, understanding how this development's being considered. Critically important to move fast, but also critically important to get it right. Megan.
Yeah, I would just like to say, just to echo, I guess, the importance of the urgency of moving forward with environmental monitoring. I think, what we're sort of witnessing in my community is there's a lot of political will for this to move forward, but the questions about environmental impacts are really at the forefront of people's minds. And so I think to really get communities behind it, particularly those are going to be directly impacted, it's really important that you have data to answer some of those critical questions. So I just, again, echo what others have said about the urgency of really moving forward with environmental monitoring so we can have some answers and put people's, hopefully, concerns to rest. So yeah.
Thank you. And I think practically speaking, Jen, question or Iwe, that would mean then monitoring in those call areas, those geographic areas in advance of any development. So we understood baseline conditions.
Yeah, and Iwe, maybe you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So this comprehensive guidance, not just focus on baseline, is part of that, but also the ongoing monitoring. So that could across the lifespan that takes up to, I think, 30 years now for a offshore wind farm. So we are hoping to have the long-term monitoring guidance.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the conditions of the Coastal Commission's consistency determinations include that some of that baseline monitoring as we're leading up to when we will see construction.
Lieutenant Governor. Please. Yep.
So move. I'd
Great.
like to move this item forward.
Great. So Lieutenant Governor is moving the approval to disperse funds for offshore wind environmental monitoring guidance. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Katie. Thank you very much. Holly, please call the roll.
Secretary Crowfoot.
Here, aye or yes.
Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis.
Enthusiastic aye.
Katie Landau.
Aye.
Megan Rocha.
Yes.
Alexis Jackson.
Aye.
The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Thank you so much, Iwe, for the presentation. And we're excited with this item and really all of the items. This was a great cross-section of actions and priorities that we approved in advance today at the council. Our next item is, as I mentioned earlier, public comment on non-agenda items. So this is an opportunity for members of the public to raise any topics of interest or priority to them that weren't specifically addressed in the agenda. So I'll turn to Holly to call on that public comment.
Okay. First, we have Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg, followed by phone caller last four digits 4936, and then Keith Rutzart. Rebecca, you have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure
Yes.
can.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, Director Eckerle, and OPC council members and staff. My name is Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg, and I'm the president of Coastal Policy Solutions, a small consulting firm where I work with nonprofits and government agencies to advance conservation projects in California. I wanted to daylight something today that's come up in several meetings I've had recently related to eelgrass. As you know, eelgrass is a priority habitat for coastal communities and wildlife. OPC's strategic plan includes targets for eelgrass restoration, as do many other state and local agency strategic plans and implementation plans. Further, the California eelgrass mitigation policy recommends no net loss of eelgrass habitat function. And as we've heard today, AB 1407 would go a long way towards improving these efforts towards large-scale eelgrass restoration. The point I'd like to daylight is that while we've done a lot of work to establish restoration targets and protection policies, what we aren't doing as a state, as far as I'm aware, is actively tracking how eelgrass is doing and really answering the question, are we achieving no net loss of eelgrass habitat function across our state? Restoration and mitigation projects track their own local successes, and there have been efforts to collate existing data and maps, usually using the products of ad hoc and project-specific monitoring efforts that vary in methodology and intent. But what we don't have is a systematic statewide program to map existing eelgrass resources and track how those resources are changing through time due to restoration, protection, and on the flip side, through stressors like sea level rise, increasing ocean temperatures, and eelgrass wasting disease. Many conservation partners, including Audubon, California, have identified a need for this type of baseline and ongoing survey if we're going to meaningfully achieve our eelgrass protection and restoration goals. If we don't know how we're doing, we won't know if we need to change what we're doing. I appreciate the conversations we've had today about the importance of data collection and monitoring towards adequately protecting our resources. And given OPC's leadership in coordinating protection of our coasts and oceans, I wanted to daylight the issue here for further consideration. Thank you for all you do for our state's wildlife and communities.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for raising this.
Next speaker is going to be dial in 5936, followed by Keith Rodsart and Caitlin Birch. Telephone caller, you have the floor.
Excuse me, Eileen Boken, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. Following up on the coalition's previous comments at the January 24th meeting of the Ocean Protection Council. Officially, the Farallon Islands and the waters between the Farallons and Ocean Beach are within the boundaries of the city and county of San Francisco, specifically in Board of Supervisors District Number 4. The coalition recently provided comments at the Coastal Commission meeting on March 8th and at the Greater Farallons National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council meeting on April 21st. Regarding the inclusion of the waters off Ocean Beach into the Greater Farallons National Marine Sanctuary as a non-contiguous area. There is concern regarding the discharge from the oceanside treatment facilities outfall pipe would be into the sanctuary. San Francisco has a combined sewer system which processes both wastewater and stormwater. Currently, during dry weather, 10 to 11 millions of gallons per day are discharged from the outfall pipe. However, when the recycled water facility at the Oceanside Treatment Plant comes online later this year, the dry weather discharge will be significantly reduced to 5 to 6 millions of gallons per day. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen.
Next speaker is going to be Keith Rodsart, followed by Caitlin Birch, and then Richard Sadowski. Keith, you have the floor.
Hello, Keith Rodsart from the Giant Kelp Restoration Project again. 30 by 30 should have been called 30 and 30 by 30. The MPAs are considered 16% protected, but really the state marine conservation areas allow take of fish. So only 9% of the coast is protected. Of that 9%, the North Coast MPAs receive no benefit because they are swamped by urchins. In the Central Coast, the only state marine reserve with a benefit was Point Bouchon. And that is because the urchins just haven't gone that far south yet. Poor fishing opportunities is the new protection. But instead of providing real protections to make up the 14% or 21%, the approach is to spend all the California climate mitigation money on terrestrial issues and not provide funding for ocean issues. Instead, the approach is to dump this requirement on the national marine sanctuaries, which do not regulate fishing, and just redefine the word protection so that we don't have to do anything. As we do kelp restoration on the Central Coast, we need more protection of groundfish that are a functioning part of this kelp forest ecosystem. It's not fair for the diving community to be working hard to restore kelp while other communities are indiscriminately removing functioning parts from the fish nursery. Better protections in the long run will make better fishing opportunities. Now is the time to do big things in the ocean, and the world is watching as we shirk our responsibilities and assign the responsibility of the 30 by 30 initiative to equatorial territories of the largest countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith.
Our next speaker is going to be Caitlin Birch, followed by Richard Sadowski, and then Laurel Irvine. Caitlin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Holly. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot and council members. My name is Caitlin Birch. I'm the Pacific Marine Scientist with Oceana. The OPC has identified sustainable fisheries and ocean biodiversity as priorities in California, and has had great success in the past working on fisheries bycatch issues such as the drift gill net transition program. Assessing and minimizing bycatch in these fisheries is one of the most direct ways to help marine wildlife and mitigate human impacts on ocean biodiversity. And the set gill net fishery operating in Southern California has a suite of bycatch issues and management needs that require attention. The use of a non-selective gear in a diverse ecosystem, such as the set gill net fishery targeting California halibut and white sea bass, requires more thoughtful and intensive management and oversight. We've been in contact with OPC staff to discuss fisheries bycatch in the set gill net fishery and other fisheries, and we hope the OPC can continue to help bring California fisheries, such as the set gill net fishery, into the 21st century of sustainable fisheries management that both prioritizes and supports responsible fishing communities as well as our marine ecosystems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Next speaker is Mr. Sadowski, followed by Laurel Irvine, and then our final speaker, Scott Webb. Mr. Sadowski, you have the floor.
Richard Sadowski, Homefront, EJ, Morro Bay. I would like to just thank the governor for the California College Corps program, and what a wonderful inaugural event it has been. And we're in the final quarter now, and I just want to say how well received and how integrated we were able to work together with our interns. And one of the things that's come up, and I would just like to make a suggestion, is that the program requires like 450 some odd hours for the interns to get a $3,000 bonus. And I would suggest that on this inaugural one, that's a kind of a steep amount, not only for the students, but also for the smaller organizations that are volunteering and sponsoring. And I would suggest that, if the students have completed their grades, that be extended to all the students that participated in the program. And I just want to once again thank your staff for just an excellent, meeting, and I always learn something from you guys, and appreciate it. And I'll welcome the new members, and looking forward to more dialogue. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Laurel, followed by Scott. Laurel, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Hi, council members. My name is Laurel Irvine. I am the Director of Communications at Shark Allies, which is a nonprofit in California focused on policy to end the overfishing of sharks. We support OPC engaging in actions that directly benefit and protect marine life, specifically fisheries bycatch of sharks. So I'm here to speak today to express concern over the high bycatch in the California set gill nets, targeting specifically halibut and white sea bass. It's also a threat to biodiversity and vulnerable shark species, especially since it pertains to the health of shark populations. 22 of the 28 species caught have unassessed populations, yet all are considered generally vulnerable due to their slow growth and maturity rates. So we hope to see OPC resources help find solutions that benefit sustainable fishing and biodiversity. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for all you do.
Thanks, Laurel.
Our last speaker is going to be Scott Webb. Scott, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Hello, OPC. My name is, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Scott Webb, and I'm representing Turtle Island Restoration Network. I want to start off by thanking OPC for its outward commitment to protecting the biodiversity off the California coast, and want to echo my colleagues at Oceana and Shark Allies, and like to call the OPC's attention to the threat to our marine biodiversity, set gill nets, which target California halibut and white sea bass. For those who do not know, set gill nets are located in Southern California and act as invisible fencing that gets stationed to the bottom of the ocean. These nets can be as long as the Golden Gate Bridge and are used real close to the Channel Islands as well. Our coalition is looking for opportunities for collaboration between all stakeholders, government agencies, and the legislator. For us, collaboration has to begin with a collective understanding and agreeing on the science we are leaning on for advocacy. And recently, Oceana and Turtle Island Restoration Network released a comprehensive report that goes over the biodiversity issues caused by set gill nets that was submitted, and I encourage you all to check it out. But some of the high-level points are 64% of all animals caught are thrown overboard, and of those, more than half of those are already dead before the water. This is among the highest discard rates by number of animals in any fishery in the country. 75% of sharks, skates, and rays that are caught are tossed overboards, and set gill nets are the primary threat to juvenile great white sharks. Speaking of NOAA's need for getting better data, understanding the data, out of the 97 finfish and shark species caught in the fishery, 68 actually don't have a stock assessment. And as of note, according to CDFW, there are 29 active halibut and set gill net permits left, and 87% of permits already use a more sustainable hook and line method. The process is currently going through the Cal Fish and Game Commission and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, but we'd like to bring this dialogue to the OPC and begin to think about how we can take on this major threat to our biodiversity. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. Holly, any others?
That concludes our public comments for this item.
Well, thanks to everybody who commented on this item and brought these other issues to our attention. Know that in the room here at the Natural Resources Agency in Sacramento, we have over a dozen of the OPC staff and of course our executive director. So this is a great opportunity to raise issues from the eelgrass inventory to the health of shark populations, 30 by 30 College Corps. Great example of leaders from across the state raising issues and using this meeting to do that. So that brings us to our final item, which is essentially adjournment. I want to share that we have next meetings planned. First, on August 15th, which is a Tuesday, we will be meeting once again in a hybrid format from 1 to 5, both in our headquarters here in Sacramento and via Zoom. Again, that's Tuesday, August 15. And then we have a meeting schedule saved the date on December 12th. As always, huge thanks, Jenn and the OPC team. You do a remarkable job. It's frankly energizing and a point of highlight, I think, for me anyways, to be here and to hear about the work and to help advance it. I want to once again welcome Alexis, Megan, Jim, and your boss, Assemblymember Addis, to the work. I know our work is going to be that much stronger for your participation, so really appreciate your public service. And of course, our Lieutenant Governor and Matt and Katie, as well as Secretary Garcia. Many thanks. I'll give the last word to our director. I should mention Heather Bao, our intrepid attorney from our agency, who's here to keep us out of trouble. And if she doesn't say much, it's a good day because it means we're doing our job right. Jenn, anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to thank everyone for being here, for my incredible team, and just really grateful for the leadership on this council.
Thanks so much. We are adjourned and we will be back again in August. Thank you very much.